welcome back, welcome back. So we're talking about STEM and technology. This next person we have on our show is a bad mother. Shut your
Shut
mouth.
your mouth.
Dr. Nicki Washington, professor at Duke University in the computer science. This sister also has a book, Unapologetically Dope. Thank you, Sam, for putting it on there. Lessons for Black women and girls surviving and striving in the tech field. Jamie, can you bring in our dear sister, Dr. Nicki Washington?
Hello.
What up? What's up, Nicki? Nicki to the there we go. There go Nicki to the front. That's what I'm talking about. Welcome, Nicki.
How are y'all doing, gentlemen?
We good. How you doing, sister?
Welcome, Nicki.
Well, thank you. Pardon me. I'm dealing with allergies down here, so I apologize.
I know you're in North Carolina. Listen, my eyes keep tearing here in I'm in Queens, and my eyes are tearing on the show right now. So I feel you, sister. So welcome, Nicki. So you heard us talking about like some of the biases in technology and stuff like that. Before we get into your book and stuff like that, have you experienced any of those things, and how did you deal with them?
Yeah. So I experienced them probably from the time I first started. One of my first experiences with racism was in my 6th grade math class with a white woman who was a teacher who was very, for some reason, pissed off that Black History Month was a thing and made it known to the class in the middle of Black History Month that this was racist. And if there was Black History Month, that we should have White History Month. And I was kind of the only person who raised my hand and said, well, that doesn't make sense because we study white history the other 11 months. And her response to me was, oh, Nicki, it's people like you who give Blacks a bad rep. Wow. And so that was kind of my first introduction to not even polite racism, very overt. But fortunately for me, I talk about the fact that I had a mom who was a programmer and a dad who was a K-12 educator and a Black male principal at the time. So I had all of these people who advocated for me, even though in that moment I could have shut down because I did. And it could have steered me directly away from anything in math and computing because I love math, I love computing. But when you have these kinds of experiences, they impact you for life. And you can always remember where you were, how you felt, even though I was 12 years old at the time. Fast forward to, I talk about very freely the experiences that I've had as a Black woman in computing, even at my prior institution, and the blatant racism and problems that I experienced due to more problematic white women a lot of times who weaponized their whiteness against me in ways that had nothing to do with my ability, but everything to do with just the fact that I did not conform and make them comfortable with my existence. And so to the point what you were talking about earlier, I think it was Kelvin that said, if you're somewhere and you don't experience racism, then that's probably an issue. You do end up in these situations where when things go well, you don't even know how to handle it because you're waiting for the ball to drop and you're always gun shy. And it's really driven a lot of the work that I do right now, to the point that you were talking about, even with coded bias. We talk a lot about the racism that's in the technology, but we don't talk enough about the racism that exists in the computing environments where they're developed. And we can never address the techno racism if we don't first talk about addressing the racism with the people in the room. And so that's where my work comes in. So you have the people like Joy Bulamwini and Timnit Gebru who are featured in Coded Bias, who talk about the technologies. I'm talking about the room and how do we get more people in the room from marginalized identities such that we can fix these things. And until we can do that, we also have to teach those computer scientists how to understand these topics of race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, class, and ability, and how white supremacy and homophobia and transphobia manifest in computing environments and then technologies. Because we can't solve the problem ourselves, right? It's just like the greater problem of racism. We're never going to be able to fix it when it's just Black folks talking about it. We have to get white folks involved, and they have to be the ones to help dismantle this. And the same goes for our computing environments as well.
So Nicki, some of the work that you do, like you say, your parents, your mother was an IBM. I read your book. Your mother's IBM. So what were some of the lessons that you got from your mother that made you like the person that you are now in this technology field?
Oh, good question. The first one was always to be true to yourself, that people will not like you. People are not always going to be comfortable with your existence, but you need to show up exactly as you are, who you are every single day. And always know that if you are doing the right thing, if you are pushing the needle forward in the right way, that even when you lose, you're not always losing, right? So I tell people a lot of times, some of those wins are going to show up in the L column, but that doesn't mean it's a complete loss. But it means that sometimes a door closes and a window and something else opens for you to just push through. And my career, I feel like, has been that. She worked in a time where from like 1972 to the early 2000s, where she saw that transition at IBM and having to deal with a lot of white and Asian men. And so for her, she always had to play the game a little bit more than I did. And so I took those lessons from her and found ways to maximize my experience, but also make sure I'm kicking down the door for other people behind me, just like she did. That was one of the biggest things, that is bigger than you. And it can never just be about you, because if you're the only person in the room and you're cool with that, then that's a problem itself.
You know, I want to ask a question. And first of all, thank you so much for coming on. I read your bio, and I was joking with the guys. I said, you can read somebody's bio and it makes you feel unaccomplished. You know, I can read. That's about where, you know. But you know, it's interesting because, you know, when it comes to education, as you talk about your parents, so I can see that you had a lot of great role models. But somewhere along the line, I think people identify children and say they have it. And you don't wind up in your position. I'm sure the hard work had to be coupled with your natural ability and your giftedness. But when did you start to know? Because I would think there's something different. You had to rise to the top of your class. You had to be competitive. I'm sure you were put in maybe honors classes. But when did you start to realize, you know what, I have something here? And I think education is going to just take me somewhere to another level when other people didn't take it as serious, especially from a young age.
So first of all, thank you. I appreciate that. I honestly don't know if I ever thought that, because my parents raised me in an environment where humility was key. You know, my parents were very much the parents that, you know, you never really were successful and take it down a notch, but they also surrounded me with so many people from different backgrounds and identities. And growing up here in Durham, when I did, I say it was such an amazing time, because I was surrounded by other Black students who were just as smart, if not smarter. Like when I graduated from high school, I was maybe in the top 10%, but I wasn't the head of the class. And there were a ton of other Black students who we kind of filtered everyone else out, because we all grew up together. We were dealing with these experiences. So we put blinders on and we kept that friendly competition with each other. I think part of it was because I played sports, so I was always competitive in a different way. So it kind of translated into academics. And for me, I stayed in the books because I didn't want to not be able to play sports. And I think when I got to college, that was probably the first clue for me that my experience K-12 probably wasn't the same for a lot of people. Even though I attended an HBCU, Johnson C. Smith in Charlotte, in my first programming class, I was kind of the one student who had taken programming before, and the teacher was like, why does this come a little bit more naturally for you? And I said, well, it's not natural. I took programming courses in high school. And that was kind of the first person who said, you know, you have something, because I planned to major in business as a high school student and college first year. But then my professor said, computer science, at the time it was 1996. So he said, by the time you graduate in 2000, computer science is going to be a really huge field. And as a Black woman, I think you'll do so much better here than in a space like business. So if you trust me on that, I can kind of help steer you. And that kind of was that turning point for me, where I was like, oh, for me. Now, teaching and education, I never wanted to do, because for me, it was by the time everything for me was, I don't want to work. So I'm cool with being a professional student as long as I could sustain my lifestyle and do what I needed to do. So when I entered the workforce, it was kind of like, all right, I'm ready to make paper because I've been in school for too long. But I was so miserable at my job, and there was an opportunity to teach part-time at Howard University. But I didn't want to teach part-time. I hated my job. And so I took this kind of leap of faith, like, well, maybe this will be a good fit for me. I said, maybe eventually I'd want to be a professor. And that kind of just opened up the doors. And I give credit to my department chair at the time, Lee Burge, who he kind of gave me carte blanche and took me under his wing. Like, you know, I don't win unless you win. So let's figure this out.
Dr. Washington, I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of Calvin's question. I want you to tell the viewers your credentials and your background, because I was impressed with your bio as well.
Gosh, y'all are making me blush.
You deserve it. You deserve it.
I appreciate it. So I am a graduate, a very proud graduate of Johnson C. Smith University, class of 2000 in computer science. I earned my bachelor's degree there. I went on to North Carolina State University and received my master's and PhD from there, finishing in 2005. And so from there, I worked for a year at the Aerospace Corporation in Chantilly, Virginia, left that, and for 10 years was on faculty at Howard University in the computer science department. I left there in 2015, spent 5 years at Winthrop University in Rock Hill, South Carolina in the computer science department there. And then for the last year, I've been back here home in Durham at Duke University as a professor of practice in the computer science department there.
So, and I'm like black girl magic. So
Yeah.
So what do you want for like we had Gerald Moore on here before. He's talking about young black men getting more into the tech field, and now we got yourself here bringing young girls into it, because I want to see like all the futuristic movies never have black people in them, and I think you two are about to put black people in all that in the future. So what do you tell young people that don't know what they want to do in life and stuff like that? How could they get? Why would you tell them to get into this field of STEM?
So the first thing I'd say is it's okay to not know what you want to do, because I probably didn't know what I really, really wanted to do until probably like 6 or 7 years ago. Everything else was kind of, I had enough experience and background to try something, and it was like, all right, I'll try it and see. We put a lot of pressure on kids, especially to kind of have everything figured out when, they're just trying to enjoy being a kid. I would say that I think it's important for every student, particularly Black students, Indigenous students, and Latino students, to get exposure in computer science in some way, because we're moving to a situation where technology impacts our everyday lives in so many different ways. And we need more people who look like us at the table, making decisions, calling out things, being those gadflies in the room that say, this doesn't make sense because, like Joy said, encoded bias. For someone like me, this facial recognition technology doesn't even pick up me and my facial features. There's also the issues, though, if you think about it, where we don't learn enough, even as computer scientists, how social science plays a part in all that we do and the impact. And I think that's why we see so many problems. So, for example, there's a technology that's been released by NYPD recently. I don't know if y'all saw it with the DigiDogs. And so there's now this surveillance, this mechanical robot dog that's moving specifically through communities of color, surveilling them in ways now that they're not even aware of at times. And there's other ways in which surveillance is already happening as well. So we have apps like, the Neighbor app, or those kind of things that everyone can fill out about their individual neighborhood, where people are now policing communities, and you and I could be surveilled and we don't even know it because we're just kind of trying to walk or exercise. And so that's why we need our students to start understanding not just programming, but also the ways in which these technologies are impacting our communities in negative ways, and where that historically is rooted. Because it's not just in the technology, right? This goes back to, we can start talking about financial fintech applications for like mortgage and credit apps, and the problems with Reconstruction and sharecropping and Black codes, and how all of those historical events have led to the fact that we oftentimes don't have what is deemed as acceptable credit to qualify for certain things like a mortgage or anything else. But we have to start getting students to think critically, not just about programming, but also about those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, and just to add on to what you said, they actually were able to prove that some of those facial recognitions with that NYPD identity was making a lot of mistakes when it came to African Americans' faces. They were identifying the wrong person.
Yep. And then we see, right? Look at what happens when someone is falsely accused, because when police are sent and called, they don't care about that a lot of times. And we see it every single day. It's like every other day we learn of another Black person who's been killed or assaulted, injured in some way. They don't care. When they get the call, they go. And so we have to have people who are doing their due diligence to make sure that those kind of mistakes can't happen, because when they happen, it only affects us. It never affects them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I want to get into your book a little bit here. I'm gonna hold up your book again for those who can see. Can the camera? Am I getting a good camera look? Okay, there it is. Okay. So in your book, like for me, I would ask you first. This is my first question to you. What is your favorite chapter in the book and why?
Oh, I would say my favorite chapter is asking for help. And I say that one because it's often hard, especially as Black women, to say that I can't do it all, and we end up taking on a lot more. And I appreciate it now, the fact that I can talk about the fact that I almost drowned in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in Turks and Caicos because I was worried about how it looked to white folks, as if I couldn't swim, right? So for anyone who doesn't know, there's a story I tell about how I went snorkeling. And to y'all's point about traveling, I traveled by myself to Turks and Caicos, and that was a whole thing in another relationship at that time. That's another story.
That was a long time ago.
But I'm in Turks and Caicos and I'm snorkeling. I'm the only Black person other than the people working. And the gentlemen who run the tour, they're down there like Michael Phelps, they're getting it. And I was like, oh, I can swim. So when it was time for us to kind of just have free time, everyone was taking off their life vests and just going down this slide. So I figured, I know how to swim. I can do that too. And then I get in the water. I'm not really in the best shape at the time. And so like 10 seconds of treading water, I'm like, yeah, this wasn't a good call. So now I'm trying to get back to the boat. And by the time I get back, I am so out of breath. I have to kind of sit on the steps for a minute to gather myself. But I kept saying the whole time, I don't want to drown. I can't drown in front of these white people. I know how to swim. I don't want them to think I can't, right?
Yeah.
But it's that whole thing of, you are so afraid to ask for help because you're worried about what it looks like to white folks instead of just worrying about getting the help you need. And that's
the effect of racism on you.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's what it is. Because
the
thing is, I remember being transferred to certain places and being the only Black supervisor there. And I have to go twice as hard. I can't make mistakes because I'm worried about what the white guys are going to say.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't be that person that stands out when it comes to them or in a negative way, because that's what racism does to you. It puts that in your mind.
And all of they are the most mediocre a lot of times, and so you're holding yourself to a standard that they will never meet.
Correct.
Yeah, you know what I have I'm sorry, Keith, just one question. I have this thing that I kind of resent, and maybe you've experienced this, I'm sure. There's this thing and this misnomer, like Asian people are like the most, gifted when it comes to mathematics and things like that. And I'm not knocking Asian people. I'm talking about the perception that other races seem to have, like, this joke about I'm gonna sit next to the Asian person in class in math or whatever, which most of that is probably based on some type of discipline, whoever it is. But how do you feel about that? Because I think our young people who would love to follow in your steps, they just think in some cases they're not bright enough, they're not smart enough. And I think we don't encourage them from the beginning that you just, this idea back in the day, you just find a good, white person to work for or try to get you a city job or whatever. But some people are not taught that you can use your mind and you can be a brilliant person if you just, work hard and exercise the gifts that you have. Can you speak a little bit about that to younger people that will watch this video and they want to hear your words?
Yeah, and that's a really good question and point, because I think it's important for everyone to understand the ways that these assumptions that we make are all, again, like Rodney just said, rooted in white supremacy, right? That whole model minority myth that is used to describe Asian and Asian Americans, it is rooted in white supremacy and anti-Blackness specifically. And there's this idea of stereotype lift and stereotype fail, right? So a lot of times Black students will have this idea of stereotype fail, like I'm just not good enough. I'm not good in math. I can't do it, whatever else, because I don't see enough of me. Stereotype lift on the opposite side is a lot of Asian students who feel like I'm not good in it either, but there's all of this pressure for people who think that automatically because of how I look and my race that I'm supposed to be. I think it's important that we understand that being in the room, everyone, and as I tell my students, everyone comes in a lot of times with that same level of knowledge or lack of knowledge. There's one or two students who are always the exception, but by far, everyone is coming in at that same level. The issues that impact us the most have nothing to do with our technical skills. We get discouraged because of a teacher who says, oh, well, I don't expect much from you. That's okay if you don't get it. Or a student who shows up and says, oh, are you here because of affirmative action? See, those are the non-technicals and the non-technical things that have nothing to do with how we succeed in the classroom, but they totally destroy a student's sense of belonging and self-confidence. So what I want students to know is that we are so gifted. You know, if we look back historically, there's so many examples of how we were the first, right? Look at who invented math. First of all, look at Katherine Johnson. The first computers in this country were women, and the women who got the astronauts to Mars and back and wherever else in space or the moon, I'm sorry, were Black women.
Yeah.
We need our students to know that it is okay to not know. And the biggest part in computer science is not knowing. Nobody knows everything, but let anybody tell it, you think they do. Right. And the beauty in not knowing is that because computing is moving so fast, there's no way you can ever know and keep up with everything. So I want students to understand that you enter with that that lack of knowledge and that just inquiry and that inquisitive nature, and use that to your advantage. Find out what your passion is, because computing is the one space that's so interdisciplinary. You can be in music, you can be in law, you can be in medicine, business, and you can still find a fit with computing in that space. So it's not so isolated where it doesn't apply to what you love to do. All of us love to get on our phone and do something, be it tweet, you know, use some kind of music app, whatever. That's all computing. Imagine if you are building the next Spotify or Tidal instead of just consuming and using the next Spotify or Tidal. Put that power in our hands, right?
Excellent point.
Yeah,
you know what? So that's the point. You know, to your point, so much of learning is community driven. You know, we have that phrase, you know, each one teach one, for instance. You know, like how can we get our kids, you know, the next generation to that knowledge? How do we get those in those? How do we get them in those rooms? You know, how do we apply that learning?
Well, I think just inspiring them to understand what you just said, instead of like being the consumer. We have to understand to being the owner of this stuff. I think that's like going to a point. That's why I think I want to get our kids focused on that part more.
Yeah,
especially our young sisters too.
Yeah, I think the questions to ask them become, when you find out that a student loves something, like, well, what do you think goes into creating that and making that? How can we make that happen? Start to show them those individuals who are doing this work. And then there's a lot of things that even if you don't have, for example, a Black Girls Code chapter or Girls Who Code or anything else that relates to getting students into programming, there are environments that you can use yourself to start building those skills. So App Inventor was created several years ago by MIT, and it's kind of a drag and drop environment that allows students to start learning basic programming fundamentals through a drag and drop environment where it fits together like puzzle pieces, and they build an app. And they can build it without having a phone. And so those are ways that you can start to give your child something to do at home as you start to try to find other things that they can do within the community. The biggest piece is that you don't have to know how to do these things, but having table talk and just starting to engage your students in these conversations and help them identify and flesh out what they want to do is so powerful, right? My grandparents never finished high school or never went to high school. And they told my mama at a certain point, all we can do is pray for you. And they got her through, right? But it's the point of just giving them the tools, encouraging them to have those conversations like I said, well, if you like this app, what if I told you that there's a way that you could start to build an app? Let's figure out how to build this app together and use App Inventor. And it's very easy to begin to learn those pieces, those small pieces that you can connect to start making the bigger pieces, such that by the time they get to high school, they're a little bit more interested in these kinds of technologies. And they're all free. That's the beauty of it. As long as you have access to the web, you have access to a lot of this stuff.
Wow, I know. And a part of your book, like that, is what you said. Something you said earlier about the swimming, kind of made me think about it. Like own and trust your dopeness. Like when you knew you swim. Like see, that's part of a chapter in the book. Like so you can talk about it if you want to, Doc. But I just maybe when you thought about the swimming and stuff like that, like yo, you dope. I can swim. you know, but
Yeah. Well, you know, there's this idea of, you know, imposter syndrome a lot of times that we all tend to have. And I tell people all the time that sometimes I have it too, because when people say, you know, we want to talk to you, it's like, for what? Right. But at the same time, you have to recognize that we all have gifts, and it's okay to brag and be proud of and aware of your accomplishments, because if you don't brag on you, who else will? And that's what I kind of had to come to at that point. And, you know, I'm a little bit older now. So I'm at the point where, you know, I show up in rooms and it's like, I'm here, you know, now y'all can sleep on me if you want, but that's going to be your L to take.
Correct.
That took a while to get to, right? Because when you have to face so many battles, you can get worn down a lot. So I think it's important that people remember that, you know, you were in the room for a reason. I have some students who just graduated from Duke, some young Black women who are going into new jobs coming up, and they're like, I'm really nervous because I don't know. And I keep saying, baby girl, you just graduated with a degree from Duke University. You are ready. Like, nobody can take that from you. And I need you to recognize that. And I need you to show up with the audacity of a mediocre white man, because that's how they show. That's how they show up, regardless of whether they are ready or not. Every single day they are live at 5, and I need you to show up with just a 10th of that, because if you do, you'll be fine. Like, none of them know anything either. They're just banking on the fact that you're gonna keep quiet.
Yeah, we gotta stop making ourselves so small. That's why we always come into a room being small. Like, you know, we scared to be seen. We scared to be Black in certain rooms. Like, yo, my name is Damon. It's no other. I don't code switch because my name is Damon. And like, you know who I am.
And you better say the name right too.
You know I am. You know I am about that.
That's right. I know. You better say my name right.
Don't say my name wrong. I'll correct any white
man. I show up every day. And I am normalizing Blackness in spaces that it's normally not. So when I show up, I'm coming in sneakers, t-shirts, jeans. All of my lectures are gonna like be named after some kind of hip hop or, you know, Black music song. So I'm bringing so much that I want to make sure that the people who are the least seen are the most represented in every single one of my courses. And you know, to my credit, I'm like, who? And I tell, it's terrible to say this, but I'm it's kind of like that Sheree from Real Housewives meme. Who gonna check me, boo? Like, who's gonna tell me that I can't do this, right? You can't tell me that I don't have the same credentials as you. So if we want to do a tit for tat, we can do that, but you probably won't win.
You know, we have so many of our children in our families. We don't necessarily have the resources in terms of, like, you know, computer, you know, and, you know, broadband and everything. So how do you get them? You know, what's the difference between, let's say, class learning and online learning? You know, because I noticed too, you know, you did some stuff with code.org as well, you know, and you mentioned, you know, learning online. Like, how do we get those tools in their hands?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we learned over 2020 is that we weren't really doing online learning. We were doing remote learning and failing at it, because online learning would have been a situation where, like you said, Derek, right, everyone has the resources they need to succeed. I think that the biggest issue that we're facing, like you said, is going to be this access for our students right now in a time of COVID and the identity-based issue. So it's really important that you understand that you don't need a computer to start to understand these kinds of topics and learn them. If you can get to a library, there are a ton of books there as well that will teach you a lot of these topics. Now, it's not going to be as engaging as we're used to with all the bells and whistles, but it's still going to give you those fundamentals. And a lot of this can be kind of walk and talk kind of conversations that start to point out things. There's a really good book I would suggest for anyone who's looking to try to figure out a lot of this, and it's called Radical Equations. And it's a book by Robert Moses. He was organizer with SNCC. And he created the Algebra Project in Boston. But the reason I love that book is because he talks about and parallels how his trying to get more Black and brown students to take math by the 8th grade. He paralleled it with trying to get sharecroppers in Mississippi and the South the right to vote, and convincing them that they needed to do this because it was going to be the key to financial freedom for them. and some equality. But he talks about the ways in which he started to point out things like how using the subway can be used to describe computer networks, for example, and just everyday things that you're using, and how the trains moving on the tracks are the links, and then the nodes, the trains are the nodes, but the actual paths and tracks are the links that connect this entire network. Getting students to kind of think those things through doesn't require a computer. It just requires some creativity. And like I said, you can grab that from your local library. You can grab it if you have access to a smartphone, which most of us do. You can pull that and start to leverage that information as well.
Yeah. Dr. Washington, I want to backtrack a little bit, and I don't like to play Monday morning quarterback, but you should have told that lady that I'm going to see you at 3:00 when she told you that you wasn't going to be nothing. Another thing, I think we should get your credentials. And if she's still with us, we should mail them to her.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, a 12-year-old is kind of like, you don't know how to process that.
I know. I'm just joking around.
I have wondered. I'm like, I wonder where Miss Bothwell is now. But yeah. Hey, Miss Bothwell, if she's watching.
I know this. I know it may be petty, but
I did
it a couple of times myself. There's some people that didn't think I was going to amount to something, but they know now. They know.
Oh,
now.
Yeah.
I live in petty. My former employers, I operate in that space now a lot of times.
Yeah.
Dr. Washington, I got one last question for myself. And one chapter of your book is like assemble your tribe. Can you just explain what that means? Because I think a lot of young girls are going out here not understanding who they should situate themselves around. So
yes, that's a really good chapter because it talks about the importance of having 5 people who fit these different needs in your life at different points. So there's the sage, right, who's a little bit older, wiser, can kind of guide you. There's the motivator, who's usually your peer, who can kind of provide friendly competition. There's the straight shooter, who's going to give it to you, no chaser, and you may not like what they have to say, and it's going to hurt, but you'll be all right. Then there's the cheerleader, who kind of, picks you back up when all else is failed. And I can't even remember, what is the 5th one? I can't remember.
Hold on, got it right here because you said sage, you said cheerleader, and the last one is the plug, the motivator plug.
Sorry, the plug. Yeah, the plug is that person that's they've got the connections to everyone else. Mm-hmm. But it's really important because as Black women, we understand the importance of having each other's back, right? And needing to lean on each other because we're not going to get through this field and in this life without each other. I especially want to encourage my young sisters to pay attention to and develop relationships in that same way. I think that we had the luxury of not having social media when we were growing up. And so we were able to create more meaningful relationships in ways that did not involve a like or, a retweet. And so I fear a lot of times because we've seen instances where young girls or young women are in groups. And for example, they're not looking out for each other. And then something happens to one. And those are just kind of things that we take for granted. Because my friends and I, if one of us goes out on a date or something, it's like, this is his name. This is where we're going, those kinds of things. But I think we have to remember that and teach that to young girls as well. Because again, they're going to face Mrs. Bothwell's. They're going to face a Becky or Amy Cooper. They're going to face a Chad. and they have to be able to lean on each other and get that support. And we still have to teach both our young men and our young women that they need each other and they need to look out for each other as well, right? Because we're not going to make it without the brothers. The brothers aren't going to make it without us, right? We are all fighting the same battle. We fight different battles, but it doesn't negate either one of our experiences.
Yeah. So Nicki, how can people get more involved? And I want to know about where can we find the book at and stuff like that. If we want to help, you got any kind of charity, donate any kind of funds, anything like that, let us know.
I don't have a charity, but I would say donate to your local students. If you know some students who want to attend some sort of camps or do something, make sure you pour into them. The book is available at NickiWashington.com. That's NICKI Washington. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, all of that, all the time, trying to, just do my bit to help disrupt and dismantle
racism in the STEM field.
That's it.
Dr. Nicki Washington, we truly appreciate you, sister, your time and the information and knowledge and wisdom that you gave to us tonight. We love you, sister, and let us know anything you need from the brothers. Let's chop it up.
Thank you. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
Have a good night.